In the early years of the American Civil War, before the names of great battles were etched into history books, a group of Union soldiers began forging a legacy unlike any other. They weren't born warriors, but farmers, teachers, craftsmen, ordinary, men from the western states of Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. Yet together, they would earn a name that struck fear into their enemies and inspired pride in their allies. They became known as the Iron Brigade. At a time when most Eastern soldiers looked down on the Westerners, this brigade was determined to prove themselves. They were part of the Army of the Potomac, but unlike other units, they stood out, not just for their bravery, but for their appearance. While most Union soldiers wore blue kepis, the men of the Iron Brigade donned tall black Hardee hats, giving them a fierce and distinguished silhouette on the battlefield. These hats would become a symbol of unshakable grit and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Their journey began in 1861, when regiments like the 2nd Wisconsin and 19th Indiana were first assembled. Many of these men had never left their hometowns, let alone face the brutal realities of war. But under the leadership of generals like John Gibbon, they were trained with strict discipline and forged into a cohesive, battle-ready force. Gibbon, a regular army officer, demanded perfection, and his men responded with fierce determination. They drilled in the mud, marched for miles, and learned to fight as one. That bond, the kind built under fire, would become their greatest weapon. But it wasn't just their training that made them special. It was their heart. From the very beginning, they were thrown into the fire, tasked with some of the hardest assignments on the battlefield. They were often placed at the center of the fighting, where the bloodshed was thickest. They didn't flinch. They held the line. At Bronner's farm, they stood toe-to-toe with Stonewall Jackson's veterans and refused to back down, suffering massive casualties, but refusing to break. It was after that brutal clash that someone, perhaps in awe or disbelief, said that these men fought like they were made of iron. And the name stuck. The Iron Brigade didn't just win battles, they won respect. Their courage, their stubborn refusal to retreat, and their willingness to sacrifice for each other and the cause of Union quickly became legend. Even Confederate soldiers learned to recognize the black hats and to brace themselves when they appeared. These weren't just soldiers. These were warriors who represented the soul of a divided nation, united by one purpose: to preserve the Union, no matter the cost. Their story wasn't just about strategy or numbers. It was about identity. It was about turning pain into purpose, fear into strength, and men into legends. And this was only the beginning. If the black hats and fierce reputation of the Iron Brigade caught people's attention, it was the battles they fought that carved their legend into history. These weren't just skirmishes or minor clashes. These were moments where the fate of armies and the soul of a nation hung in the balance. And every time the Iron Brigade was thrown into the thick of it, they didn't just show up, they made a statement, and the enemy remembered them. Their trial by fire came at Bronner's farm in August of 1862. Imagine this. Late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the Virginia fields as the Union men marched unknowingly into a deadly trap. Outnumbered, exhausted, and surprised by Stonewall Jackson's hardened veterans, the Iron Brigade didn't retreat. They formed ranks, they aimed, and they fired. For over 2 hours they fought face to face with the enemy, just 100 yards apart. The smoke, the chaos, the screams. It was a vision of hell. But the Iron Brigade stood their ground. When the guns fell silent, Nearly 1/3 of their number lay dead or wounded. Yet Jackson's men had been stopped cold. That stand at Bronner's Farm wasn't just a fight, it was a declaration. The Iron Brigade was here, and they were unbreakable. But their legend didn't stop there. At the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, they were again at the front lines. As the sun rose over the cornfields, they advanced under a hail of Confederate fire. The 6th Wisconsin, part of the brigade, charged directly into the infamous cornfield, a killing zone soaked in blood and lined with bodies. The Iron Brigade pushed through where others faltered, driving the enemy back in vicious close-range combat. The cost was enormous, but their courage lit a spark in the Union lines and helped turn a chaotic battle into a hard-won stand. Then came Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. The opening day of the most important battle of the war. The Iron Brigade was among the first Union forces to arrive. As Confederate troops surged forward, the brigade moved into action, anchoring the defense west of the town. In a matter of hours, they faced repeated charges from vastly larger forces. Yet again, they held their ground, repelling wave after wave with brutal determination. They suffered over 60% casualties in one day. But they delayed the Confederate advance long enough for the Union Army to regroup on high ground. That stand may have changed the course of the entire war. Every time they fought, they lost brothers, but every battle also made their name stronger. The Black Hats became a symbol, not just of the Iron Brigade, but of defiance in the face of death. Commanders relied on them, the enemy feared them, and other soldiers aspired to be like them. These weren't just battles. They were crucibles, moments that forged honor, sacrifice, and legend in the fire of war. And every time, the Iron Brigade answered the call. Behind every act of battlefield heroism was a soldier enduring the brutal, unforgiving reality of war. Life in the Iron Brigade wasn't just about bullets and bayonets. It was about survival, suffering, and a brotherhood forged through unimaginable hardship. These men, hailed as the fiercest fighters in the Union Army, lived a life of constant exhaustion, hunger, and fear. But they also carried a pride few others could understand, a pride earned through blood, fire, and loyalty. Their days began before sunrise, often with the piercing sound of a bugle calling them to drill or march. Marching was endless. Mud, rain, blistered feet, none of it mattered. Orders came, and they obeyed. Whether they were moving into position for battle or trudging through forests with gear that could weigh over 50 pounds, the men of the Iron Brigade pressed forward. Their uniforms, once crisp and blue, quickly turned ragged from the elements. But those tall black Hardee hats, they remained. Dirty, dented, sweat-stained, those hats were a symbol. A reminder of who they were and what they stood for. Camp life offered no comfort. When not marching or fighting, they huddled in tents or under makeshift shelters, writing letters home or repairing what little gear they had. Rations were scarce and often spoiled. A chunk of hardtack, a slice of salt pork, maybe some coffee if they were lucky. And yet in the midst of hunger and cold, these men found moments of laughter, jokes, songs, stories of home. They clung to anything that reminded them of life before the war. What truly bound them was their loyalty to each other. They weren't just soldiers in a unit. They were brothers. In the chaos of battle, they fought not for glory or medals, but for the man beside them. They watched friends fall. Some died instantly. Others cried out for help they couldn't give. And still, they held the line. Even after losing half their numbers in a single battle, they stood shoulder to shoulder, ready for the next command. Their letters home tell the story best. Worn, stained papers filled with words of love, fear, and quiet courage. Many wrote to reassure their families that they were safe, even when they weren't. Others shared the horrors they witnessed, the carnage, the noise, the endless tension, of not knowing if each battle would be their last. But above all, those letters carried a sense of duty. They believed in what they were doing. They believed the Union was worth the price they were paying, and when new recruits joined, they learned. Quickly, this wasn't just any brigade. This was the Iron Brigade. The standards were higher, the expectations were tougher, and yet men took pride in earning the right to wear the black hat. It meant something. It meant you were willing to sacrifice more, fight harder, and never back down. Because to be part of the Iron Brigade wasn't just a role in history, it was an identity. A badge of honor earned not in words, but in wounds, sweat, and unshakable courage. Being part of the Iron Brigade meant more than just marching into battle. It meant waking up every day knowing you might not survive to see the next. For these men, life wasn't measured in years or even months. It was measured in miles marched, nights survived, and comrades lost. And yet, in the mud, the hunger, and the gunfire, they carried themselves with a pride few soldiers in the Civil War could claim. They were ordinary men, thrown into extraordinary circumstances, farmers, blacksmiths, teachers. But the moment they put on that tall black Hardee hat, something changed. They weren't just fighting for the Union anymore. They were fighting for each other, for the names on their regimental flags, for the legacy they were building with every step. The Iron Brigade quickly became known not just for its courage in battle, but for its unshakable discipline and determination in the face of unimaginable hardship. Daily life was harsh, relentless. Sleep was rare, and even when it came, it was often broken by distant cannon fire or the cold bite of the wind. Their camps were crude, rows of tents or hastily built shelters offering little protection from the elements. Food was always an issue. A soldier's diet usually consisted of hardtack, brick-like biscuits so tough they had to be soaked in coffee just to be edible, and salt pork that often spoiled in the heat. Water was scarce, clean water even more so, and sickness claimed many lives before bullets ever did. Marches could stretch for miles through mud, snow, or heat. Boots wore down, feet blistered, and yet the Iron Brigade pushed forward. They were often given the most dangerous positions on the battlefield, and even in moments of rest, they trained, drilled, and prepared. Their commanders expected more from them, not just because of their reputation, but because they had proven time and time again they could handle it. Still, even amidst the hardship, they found moments of humanity. Around the campfire, songs were sung, sometimes off-key, sometimes tearful. Letters were written home, filled with hope, fear, and longing. Some men kept journals, recording their thoughts in case they never made it back. Others carved small tokens from wood or bone to carry as good luck charms. And through all of it, a sense of unity bound them tightly. They weren't just part of a brigade. They were a family forged in fire. New recruits quickly learned the standard. You didn't slack off in the Iron Brigade. You didn't run. You stood your ground. If you wore the black hat, you earned it through pain, sweat, and sacrifice. It was a symbol of brotherhood, of defiance, of resilience, and once you earned it, you never let it go. Because being an Iron Brigade soldier wasn't just about surviving war, it was about rising above it. And for those who wore the black hat, the cost was high, but the honor was higher.